Before the war began, actions were already being taken within the Twisting Nether that would shape the conflict we know today as the Third War. Kil'jaeden had taken Ner'zhul after he and his followers escaped from Draenor and subjected him to endless torment, seeking to convince him to become the weapon that would allow the Burning Legion to invade Azeroth. The Dreadlords, Tychondrius, Mal'Ganis, Balnazzar, Deathrok, and Varimothras carried out this torture for so long that time lost all meaning, stretching his suffering beyond measure. Through that torture, the suffering drove Ner'zhul to beg for death, but Kil'jaeden had no intention of granting it. Instead, he offered a deal. If Ner'zhul agreed to serve the Legion as its next weapon, he would be freed from the torment and bound to a set of armor and a blade known as Frostmourne. In doing so, he would become the Lich King. Finally, after being informed of Kil'jaeden's plan for the Lich King to unleash a plague that would cause the dead to rise, Ner'zhul was cast out of the Twisting Nether and sent crashing into Azeroth, where he struck the Icecrown Glacier. Over time, the citadel from which the Lich King would rule over Icecrown and all of Northrend began to take shape, eventually becoming known as Icecrown Citadel. He first secured control over Icecrown itself, and once the region was firmly under his control, he spread the plague throughout Northrend. But it was not an easy victory. While many races fell to his control with little resistance, the Nerubians were a different story. Their conflict with the Lich King would come to be known as the War of the Spider, a brutal struggle in which they held out for as long as they could. Though a resilient and formidable race, led by the powerful Anub'arak, they ultimately fell. Anub'arak himself was then raised into undeath, bound to the will of the Lich King to serve him along with the rest of his kind that fell that day. But to expand his influence further, the Lich King would need help. Reaching out with his vast psychic power, he searched for someone willing to listen. In time, he found a man who sought greater knowledge, one who would journey to Icecrown to uncover what was unfolding there, and to learn the dark process by which the Lich King raised the dead. Before Kel'Thuzad heard the Lich King's call, he was a mage within the Kirin Tor and was introduced to Jaina Proudmoore as one of the finest magi. Though something seemed off about him. Something Jaina couldn't quite put her finger on. That feeling would turn out to be correct. No one was aware that Kel'Thuzad had a keen interest in the dark arts of necromancy, and following the Death Knights attacking Dalaran at the end of the Second War, his interest in that practice only grew stronger. He knew he had to study and dive deeper into it, but he also knew that none within Dalaran would understand. When the Lich King's voice came into his head, he knew he had to seek him out and learn what he had to offer, and with that he began his trek to the north. Arriving in Northrend with snow falling around him and the wind cutting across the frozen landscape, he saw what remained of the kingdom of Azul-Nerub. There, he ventured into a labyrinth-like structure buried deep underground where he even met with the conquered ruler, Anub'arak. The Crypt Lord led the shivering mage deeper into the structure, showing him the various wings where different trainings and experiments were taking place. Eventually, he was led to a wing where he would see how the plague worked in action, and it was something he wasn't prepared for. He walked into a room with the smell of death in the air. Inside a cage were two villagers, a man holding a woman who appeared to be terribly ill. She pleaded for Kel'Thuzad to end her suffering with one bolt of flame and just let her rest in peace. But if he wouldn't do that, then at least let her husband go. But her husband refused, saying, "Hush, sweetheart. I will not leave you." All of her talking was getting on Kel'Thuzad's nerves, so he quietly asked Anub'arak if he could silence her. Without hesitation, the Crypt Lord skewered her with his claw, shaking her free as her body crumpled to the floor. It would not take long for her to begin reanimating, but it seemed as though part of her humanity remained intact for a moment. As her skin turned a faint greenish gray, she cried out for the guards to take her husband away, but her pleas were ignored as her humanity slowly gave way to the craving growing inside. The man tried desperately to help her, but she pushed him away. Finally, the cravings got too much and she attacked him, scratching and clawing at him as she tore him apart. Kel'Thuzad couldn't watch. Turning his back, he heard the gnawing and chewing sounds of the woman devouring her husband, his screams echoing in the chamber. It was too much for him. Kel'Thuzad teleported outside into the snowy terrain, but before he could attempt to teleport again, wraiths appeared in front of him and stopped him in his tracks. He knew he would die if he tried to fight, and he couldn't run. He would never be given enough time to cast another spell, so he agreed to be taken to their master, believing that working with the Lich King would allow him to strengthen his own skills, and eventually catch the Lich King by surprise and destroy him. However, Kel'Thuzad would soon be in for a shock when he began his trek up to meet the Lich King. He quickly realized there was no way he could defeat such a being. As Kel'Thuzad made his way upward, eventually forced onto his knees and crawling toward the frozen throne, the Lich King began to explain the true scope of his power in a voice that sent terror screaming through the mage's body.
Let this be your first lesson. I have no love for you or your people. On the contrary, I intend to scour humanity from this planet. And make no mistake, I have the power to do it.
Kel'Thuzad continued ascending as the icy winds blew and the race behind him refused to let him rest. The Lich King continued to speak, his voice inescapable within his mind.
You will never catch me unaware, for I do not sleep. And as you should have already guessed, I can read your thoughts as easily as you might read a book. Nor can you hope to defeat me. Your puny mind is incapable of handling the energies I manipulate on a whim. Immortality can be a great boon. It can also be agony the likes of which you have not yet begun to fathom. Defy me and I will teach you what I have learned of pain. You will beg for death.
Kel'Thuzad reached the summit, the frozen throne looming before him. The moment he stepped closer, an unseen force struck, driving him hard into the stone, pinning him there without mercy. He begged for release. For a moment, the pressure continued, having him wishing for death at this point. Then the weight vanished, but his strength did not return. He couldn't rise, perhaps he was never meant to. Still, he forced his gaze upward, and for the first time he saw the Lich King. A set of plate armor was seated within the throne, rather than upon it. Kel'Thuzad might have thought the armor merely black, but blinking hard, he saw that no light at all was reflected from its surface. In fact, the longer he looked, the more it seemed to devour all light, hope, and sanity. The ornate spiked helm obviously doubled as a crown. It was set with a single blue gem and, like the rest of the armor, appeared empty. In one gauntlet, the figure clasped a massive sword whose blade had been etched with runes. Here was power. Here was despair. The Lich King continued speaking to the broken mage.
As my lieutenant, you will gain knowledge and magic to surpass your most ambitious dreams. But in return, living or dead, you will serve me for the rest of your days. If you betray me, I shall make you into one of my mindless ones, and you will serve me still.
Kel'Thuzad had heard enough and knew he was going to help the Lich King. Upon the agreement being made, Kel'Thuzad was shown a vision of casters in black robes standing in a circle chanting. Though he could not understand what they were saying, he knew the ritual was powerful as the ice beneath them cracked open. The massive ziggurat he had explored earlier began rising into the air, and that was when he truly laid his eyes upon Naxxramas. The Lich King spoke once more.
You will go forth and bear witness to my power. You will be my ambassador to the living, and assemble a group of like-minded people to further my plans. You will establish my hold upon Azeroth, and this will be your vessel.
Within the floating necropolis, Kel'Thuzad made his way back to Lordaeron. He donned a disguise and began recruiting for the Cult of the Damned. He used his charisma, wealth, and intellect to persuade people to join his cause. This process was not fast, but over a span of 3 years, he built the cult to impressive numbers, recruiting people from all walks of life and many different backgrounds. Many followers came from the lower classes, such as overworked laborers and peasants. He mainly aimed his message at those who felt abandoned by society. He made various promises to try to get people to join the cult, such as immortality, equality, and freedom from suffering, and it worked. Kel'Thuzad was even able to convince some who once wielded the light to abandon it entirely and pledge themselves to Ner'zhul. He recruited the upper class of Lordaeron in the same way, and 2 examples of him doing that is the wealthy landowner Baron Rivendare joining the cult, and the family on the island of Cerdero, where he convinced the Barrow family to allow use of their manor. But they were not aware that Kel'Thuzad was with the cult when they made the deal. Their greed just got the better of them, and the desire to live forever took hold, Over time, the estate became known as Scholomance, and nearly the entire Baroff family joined the Cult of the Damned in one way or another. Scholomance would serve not only as a training ground for the cult, but also as a place where they tested the plague of undeath on the family's servants to ensure it worked as intended. Finally, the time had arrived to distribute their creation. To accomplish this, Kel'Thuzad infused cauldrons with the plague, which were then sent to cult-controlled villages where members would guard them closely. From there, the plague began working its dark and terrible magic upon the citizens of Lordaeron. The cultists themselves had no fear of dying from the plague. To them, death was simply the fulfillment of the promise of immortality through undeath. In a short time, many northern villages were turned. The plague spread further and further until the Northlands were flooded with feral zombies ready and willing to destroy anything the Lich King commanded. Kel'Thuzad looked upon the growing army with excitement, knowing that soon Lordaeron itself would feel the strength of the Lich King. Back in Icecrown, the Lich King could think only of breaking free from his icy prison, of destroying his jailers and striking down Kil'jaeden himself, the one who had condemned him to this new hell. But he knew he had to be patient. The power he wielded was great, yet it was not enough. He needed more forces and the perfect moment to strike. Though he commanded the undead, he understood their weakness as individuals. Their true strength lay in numbers, and until those numbers were sufficient, any attempt at escape would be useless. And beyond that, he knew a champion would serve him far better. Someone he could one day merge with, gaining a physical body through which he could enact his revenge. For that, he already had the perfect instrument, Frostmourne. The rune blade would be both gift and curse to its wielder, granting immense power while binding them to the Lich King's will. So he set to work, sowing the seeds of a plan that would allow him to act without revealing his true intentions. The Dreadlords had to believe the idea was their own, that granting the Lich King a champion was in the Legion's best interest, and he knew exactly how to manipulate them. Their greatest fear was Kil'jaeden. They understood that if the plague failed, it would be their heads that paid the price. While the Lich King already had Kel'Thuzad, he was occupied with leading the Cult of the Damned and couldn't serve as a battlefield commander. A champion was needed, one who could lead, conquer, and ultimately serve a greater purpose. Over time, through subtle influence, the Dreadlords were convinced. Kel'Thuzad alone knew the Lich King's true plan and remained absolutely loyal, ready to turn on the Dreadlords when the moment came. At last, they gave their approval. And so the Lich King began channeling his power into the ice that held him. He broke a piece of the ice that held Frostmourne, sending it crashing down into the glacier below, where it would lie in wait for its next victim. Sometime later, just before the Third War would begin, Thrall was asleep when he was granted a vision. In it, he saw a battle, orcs and humans in great numbers charging toward each other. Just as the two were about to clash, meteors wreathed in green fire fell from the sky, and a bright light appeared before him just before they were about to crash into the battlefield. From that light, the scene changed, and it was raining with a mysterious man before him, who told Thrall that he must save his people by traveling to Kalimdor, and to seek him out once he arrived. Thrall suddenly awoke, shooting up from his bed, his heart and mind racing. Yet even through the confusion, he knew it would be wise to follow this warning, and so he decided to lead his people west, toward Kalimdor. Elsewhere in the Eastern Kingdoms, within the capital of Lordaeron, King Tyrannus is holding a meeting with his advisors. They inform him that the Horde has begun attacking the internment camps, but even more concerning are the rumors coming from the north of a mysterious plague. One of his advisors suggests that quarantine may be necessary, but Tyrannus will not hear of it. The people of Lordaeron, he says, have suffered enough without becoming prisoners in their own land. In the middle of the discussion, Tyrannus notices a raven flying into the throne room. The bird flies before him and lands in the center of the chamber. Moments later, it transforms into a mysterious man carrying a staff and wearing a hooded cloak, one who would later be revealed as the former guardian, Medivh. Medivh delivers the same warning he had given to Thrall. The king must lead his people west to Kalimdor if they are to survive the coming threat. But after everything his people endured during the Second War, Tyrannus refuses to listen, telling Medivh that they will decide how best to protect their people, not him. At those words, Medivh departs, but before he leaves, he declares that he once failed humanity, and will not allow it to happen again. Elsewhere in the kingdom, Prince Arthas is sent to meet with Uther the Lightbringer to deal with the orcs in the region who have been kidnapping villagers. After fighting their way through the orc forces, they come face to face with the leader, slay him, and rescue the townspeople. Yet, Arthas had seen the orcs sacrificing some of the villagers. For what purpose, he had no idea, but he feared they might be attempting to summon demons back to Azeroth. Uther approaches Arthas and assures him that the demons were destroyed long ago, and that he need not trouble himself with it. Arthas nods in agreement and the two begin the journey home. But even as they ride, Arthas cannot shake the quiet voice in the back of his mind warning him that something far worse may be coming. Upon returning home, King Tyrannus informs his son of troubling rumors from the northern villages of the kingdom and tasks him with investigating them. Along the way, Arthas will meet an old friend, Jaina Proudmoore, who has been sent by the Kirin Tor to investigate the rumors of the spreading plague. While in Dalaran, Jaina overheard someone speaking with Archmage Antonidas, warning him of a great evil coming to the continent and urging him to lead his people west, toward Kalimdor. But Antonidas dismissed it outright, saying he had no interest in such nonsense. Begrudgingly, the man transformed into a raven and flew from Dalaran, hoping to find someone else who might heed his warning. Jaina believed herself unseen, and she was, but Antonidas could still sense her presence nearby. He calmly told her she could reveal herself, and Jaina stepped forward, apologizing for eavesdropping. But Antonidas only chuckled, remarking that her inquisitive nature was something he had come to rely on. Paying little mind to the warning, Antonidas instead tasked her with investigating rumors of a plague spreading through Lordaeron, one that might be magical in nature. He hoped she could confirm whether the rumors were true and, if possible, discover a way to cure it. He also informed her that a special envoy would be meeting her to assist in the task. Arthas and his men waited for Jaina to meet them. When Jaina arrived, they set out together, heading north toward Brill. As they passed by farm after farm with no one tending to them, an eerie quiet settled over the land. Falric, one of Arthas' captains, informed the prince that he had grown up in the area. The people here were isolationists. They would bring their produce and livestock into the villages, sell what they needed, and then return home. They lived simple lives, removed from the rest of the kingdom, and perhaps this time, that isolation had cost them. Falric confirmed there was no bad blood. This was simply how things were done here. Jaina pointed out that if that were the case, then it was highly likely that they would not call for outside aid when they fell ill. They would not think it was anything new or anything they couldn't handle. They pressed further down the road, hoping to find some sign of life. Instead, they found only absence. A smashed gate, missing livestock, and still, no people. A chill crept down their spines. Something was not right. Falric admitted he was surprised that no one had come out to greet them, or even to challenge them. Arthas considered that perhaps the villagers were simply being cautious, hiding indoors out of fear. So he called out to anyone within earshot. "Greetings to you all. I am Arthas, Prince of Lordaeron, and my men and I mean you no harm. Please, come out and speak with us. We have questions concerning your safety." No answer. Only the wind rustling through the leaves. The faint creak of armor as the men shifted uneasily, eyes scanning the empty fields. Jaina stepped forward, her voice steady. "Arthas, we must go and at least see. They could need our help." They all knew she was right. Although none of them wanted to enter a farmhouse that could hold an unknown number of infected, but they had sworn to protect the people of the kingdom, and that oath still held weight. Slowly, they began to move toward the farmhouse. They approached with caution. Arthas turned to Jaina, telling her to stay back, but she refused. "I told you, I'm not a fragile little figurine, Arthas. I was sent to investigate the plague, and if there are indeed victims here, I need to see them for myself." Arthas sighed, unable to argue, and nodded. "All right then." Together, they continued forward. As they reached the garden in front of the house, the wind shifted, and with it came a stench so foul it struck them all at once. It hit like a physical force. Jaina covered her nose. Arthas fought back the urge to vomit. One of his men wasn't so lucky, doubling over where he stood while the others recoiled, gagging and covering their faces. Something terrible was waiting behind that door. Jaina moved to step forward, determined to help anyone she could, when suddenly a cry rang out from inside. Not a cry for help, though. A guttural, unnatural roar, like nothing any of them had ever heard. And then something emerged. It shambled into view. The creature stood on two legs, its skin a sickly green-gray, a pitchfork clutched in its hand. Flesh hung loose from its frame and its clothing. What remained of it marked it as a farmer. The sound they had heard had come from this thing. Arthas stood frozen for a moment, trying to understand what he was seeing. This had to be one of the villagers. It was the only explanation, and yet walking corpses were not something he had ever known to exist. The creature lunged. Arthas reacted just in time, his hammer flaring with light as he snapped back to reality. He raised it to block the attack, then struck back, knocking the creature off balance. With a powerful swing, he crushed its torso. The body collapsed to the ground, crumbling under the force, and did not rise again. The air filled with the smell of burning flesh as the soldiers cried out and engaged the creatures now emerging from the house. Steel rang out as weapons struck their marks in a desperate fight for survival. Arthas turned and saw Jaina behind him, casting fireballs into the advancing undead. In the chaos, he noticed one of the creatures walk mindlessly into the flames. It didn't react, it didn't scream. It simply burned and collapsed. That was enough. Arthas called for a retreat, ordering his men to fall back. Then he turned to Jaina and gave the command to burn the farmhouse, reduce it to ash. The soldiers withdrew, forming a defensive line as Arthas stepped back beside them. He watched Jaina, seeing a new determination in her expression. She began to channel her magic, forming a fireball as large as a man before hurling it into the house. Light engulfed the structure. Arthas raised an arm to shield his eyes. When he looked again, the farmhouse and the creatures within it were being consumed by the flames. None of them could look away. The inferno was mesmerizing. And as they stood there watching it burn, the realization began to take hold of what this meant, and what would happen if this spread beyond to Brill and on to the rest of the kingdom. The fire blazed before them, and the crackling of wood and the bones of the dead were the only sounds for some time as everyone tried to process what had just happened. Arthas turned to Jaina, about to ask what those creatures were, hoping she might have some idea. She did. She said they were called undead. Falric spoke up. "Light preserve us. I'd thought things like this were just stories to scare children." Jaina replied, "No, they are real enough. I've never seen one. Never expected to." She took a deep breath to steady herself. "The dead sometimes do linger on, if their deaths were traumatic. It's what gave rise to ghost stories." She spoke with a calmness that helped ease the minds of those around her, drawing the attention of every soldier as she continued. The animation of corpses by powerful individual necromancers is not unheard of. We saw examples of this in both the First War when the orcs were able to animate skeletal remains, and in the Second with the appearance of what would come to be known as Death Knights. Jaina paused, then turned to Arthas and asked to speak with him for a moment while the troops absorbed what she had said. With the realization that necromancers could be behind this, and with all signs pointing to the plague having a magical origin, unease spread through the ranks. If this was happening here, what would they find in Brill or elsewhere in the kingdom? They prepared to move out and continue toward Brill when Jaina's eyes caught something atop a nearby hill. Arthas asked what was wrong, and she said that the land didn't look right. She guided her horse forward for a better look. As she rode toward it, the soldiers and Arthas followed close behind. As they approached the silo, Jaina dismounted and took a handful of dirt, examining it closely. The earth was dry, little more than dust. The grass had withered away. Even a small insect in her hand crumbled at the lightest touch. A faint breeze passed through and the soil in her palm simply fell apart. "It's as if the land around the granary is dying," she says. Arthas looked around and saw that she was right. Just a short distance behind them, the land was full of life, green grass, healthy soil, but here, there was nothing. The sight reminded them of the Black Morass, at how it had been twisted into the blasted lands when dark energies poured through the dark portal. Once lush, now barren and lifeless. Then a thought struck Arthas.
Could the grain itself be plagued?
Let's hope not.
She said, pointing to the crates the soldiers were carrying out of the granary.
Those crates bear the regional seal of Anderhall, the distribution center for the northern boroughs. If this grain can spread the plague, there's no telling how many villages might be affected.
At once, Arthas ordered his men to wear gloves as a precaution. Fortunately, most were already equipped, either wearing gloves or full armor with gauntlets. But just as quickly, concern overtook him. He took Jaina's hand and spoke a quiet prayer. A warm light flowed from his hands into hers, ensuring that any sickness within her would be purged. Thankfully, he didn't sense anything that needed to be purged. Now, their mission had changed. It was no longer just about protecting the people. It was about stopping the spread of the plague itself. They would have to destroy the infected grain before it could reach more villages. But they had not even reached Brill yet, let alone Anderhall, which still lay some distance ahead. But first, they would press on to Brill and see what remained of its people. On their continuing journey the next day, they crossed paths with a pair of Quel'Dorei priests who could feel that something was wrong, something creeping through the soil, and had come to offer what healing they could in hopes of stemming whatever was spreading through the kingdom. There wasn't any immediate healing to be done, but they were able to point Arthas toward a warehouse on the far edge of the village they were approaching. They continued on when suddenly a thunderous blast echoed through the air, an explosion. They raced ahead and soon found a group of dwarves fighting off the undead. The village was crawling with skeletons, and the source of the explosion became clear as the dwarves fired their cannons into the advancing horde. Another volley gave a brief reprieve, and Arthas seized the moment to approach them, asking for their help in destroying the warehouse. When the dwarves questioned why a warehouse mattered while the town was overrun, Arthas, nearing his wit's end, responded, "What's in the warehouse is killing these people, and when they die..." He pointed to the skeletons littering the ground, and the dwarves' expression shifted as realization set in. They were on the same page now, and together they began making their way toward the warehouse, still a good distance away and with many enemies in between. Jaina and the soldiers followed behind, finishing off any undead that had survived the last volley of cannon fire. During a brief lull on the road, one of the dwarves asked for Arthas' name, to which he replied, "Arthas, Prince of Lordaeron." The dwarf hadn't recognized him at first, and was taken back for a moment before introducing himself as Dargol. As they drew closer to the warehouse, more undead appeared to block their path, and without hesitation, Arthas leapt from his horse and charged into the fray. Frustration burned within him, and he focused it entirely on the enemies before him, cutting them down one after another as the group followed close behind. Jaina casting fireballs left and right, while Dargol and his dwarves joined the fight as well. As he fought, Arthas couldn't help but think about the difference between these creatures and the orcs they had faced before. Jaina had once told him that the orcs were still people, individuals. But these things were nothing more than walking corpses, jerking around like marionettes, activated by some twisted necromantic puppeteer. They fell like puppets with the strings cut too. Arthas began to notice that these undead were further decayed than the others they had fought before. Some appeared closer to mummified, while others wore scraps of armor or tattered clothing. Perhaps the villagers had tried to defend themselves. Perhaps they couldn't escape, whether from fear or the sheer number of undead in the area. But in the end, they all fell the same way, becoming mindless creatures driven only to end the living. The putrid scent filled the air, mixing with the burning of their flesh. In a brief moment, Arthas glanced around and saw his men still standing, fighting alongside Jaina, who, though pale from the strain of her magic, remained on her feet. He hadn't lost a single man. The thought grounded him, and just as quickly he threw himself back into the fight, continuing the push toward the warehouse. As they struck down foe after foe, Jaina suddenly called out a warning, and just in time, Arthas dodged a scythe swinging toward his neck from behind. With a swift turn and a crushing blow from his hammer, he ended the threat. But Jaina had seen something else. With a fireball ready in one hand, she pointed with the other toward a cluster of figures ahead. They were human, alive, but clearly not villagers or soldiers. Clad in black robes, they moved with deliberate gestures like spellcasters. Arthas immediately shifted his focus and called out to Dargol to fire on them, and without hesitation the dwarves unleashed another volley. When the casting stopped, the undead still moved, but without direction, and Dargel and his men took the opportunity to cut down as many as they could. Arthas charged forward, closing the distance, while his soldiers and Jaina dealt with the remaining undead behind him. But he was too slow. The ritual was complete and the portal opened. What emerged was a towering monstrosity, its flesh stitched together in thick, uneven seams, like something crudely sewn back into existence. It loomed over the battlefield, 3 weapons in its grasp, its lone working eye settling on Arthas. Jaina reached his side and remarked that it looked like multiple corpses stitched together, to which Arthas replied, "Let's study it after we kill it, okay?" The battle began immediately. The creature swung an axe as large as Arthas himself, but he dodged, circling behind it and striking from the rear alongside 3 of his men. 2 drove their spears into it as Arthas delivered the final blow, and the creature collapsed. But the victory was short-lived. The necromancers had escaped. Anger surged through Arthas. Jaina tried to comfort him, but he refused it. There was still work to be done. He called to Dargel and ordered the warehouse destroyed, and the dwarves gladly opened fire. He then called to Jaina to burn the rest. But before he could finish, she was already charging a fireball. When she released it, the remains of the warehouse and everything within it were consumed by flames, reduced to ash as they all stood watch to ensure nothing remained. As they prepared to move on, they explained the situation to Dargel. The necromancers, the plagued grain, all of it. And Arthas could no longer contain his anger, saying, "Necromancers, creating a plague to get more raw material for their unholy army. I want them. No, I want their leader. I want that bastard who is deliberately slaughtering my people. And it's a good bet that we'll find him and the answers we're looking for in Anderhall." Arthas drove his men forward harder than he should have, and he knew it even as he did it. But there was no time to slow down. Every moment they wasted meant more people falling ill, more people dying. Jaina rode alongside him, chewing on dried meat as they pressed onward. The light still sustained Arthas, giving him strength beyond normal limits. But Jaina was not so fortunate. Mages drew from different energies, and what she had endured, the spells she had cast, the strain she had pushed through, was beginning to show. Even so, she had given everything she had in the fighting before, just as the soldiers had. Arthas' purpose was clear: understand what was happening and stop it. But as the truth unraveled before him piece by piece, doubt began to creep in. Could he actually stop this? Could any of them? It didn't matter, he had to. It was his duty as prince to protect his people, and no matter how grim the path ahead became, Arthas would not turn from it. They had not reached the gates of Anderhall, but already smoke billowed into the sky ahead of them, stirring a fragile hope that perhaps the grain had been destroyed before it could spread any further. But as they entered the town, that hope was quickly extinguished. Flames consumed everything around them, buildings burned and the streets were empty. No villagers, no one dead, only fire. A voice broke the silence behind them. "I believe you have come looking for me, children. You have found me. I am Kel'Thuzad." Arthas turned sharply, gripping his hammer tightly as he faced the robed figure. His hood cast shadows over most of his face, leaving only his beard and the lower half of his features visible. Jaina gasped, her hand rising to her mouth as recognition struck her, but Arthas only glanced at her briefly before returning his focus to the man before them. Kel'Thuzad continued, "I've come to deliver a warning. Leave well enough alone. Your curiosity will be the death of you." Jaina's voice trembled, not with fear but with anger. "I thought this magic taint felt familiar. You were disgraced, Kel'Thuzad. Precisely for your experiment along this line. We told you it would lead to disaster, and you have learned nothing." Kel'Thuzad remained completely unfazed. "Lady Jaina Proudmoore, looks like Antonidas' little apprentice is all grown up. And quite the contrary, my dear. As you can see, I have learned a great deal." Jaina had uncovered his earlier experiments, his work with rats, the beginning of his descent into necromancy, the very actions that led to his exile from Dalaran. To them, it was horrifying. To him, it was perfection. Arthas had no patience for it. He needed answers. Was this his doing? Was he the one behind the cult? Kel'Thuzad turned to him. "I ordered the Cult of the Damned to distribute the plagued grain, but the sole credit is not mine. Arthas moved further to press, but Jaina spoke first.
I serve the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis. He commands the scourge that will cleanse this land and establish a paradise of eternal darkness.
Arthas demanded to know what they were trying to purge.
Why, the living, of course. His plan is already in motion. Seek him out at Stratholme if you need further proof.
That was enough. Arthas charged, swinging with the intent to end it in a single blow, but Kel'Thuzad vanished in a puff of smoke. In the next instant, 2 undead seized Arthas' arms, dragging him down, but he broke free and brought his hammer down, crushing one where it stood before dispatching the second just as quickly. There was no time to dwell on it. They rushed to the granaries perched atop the hill, untouched by the flames, and Arthas clung to the hope, however desperate, that the grain was still inside, that it had not yet been distributed. But when they forced the doors open, they were met with emptiness. The granary stood bare. And with that, the truth settled in. The grain was already out there, villages across the land already consuming it. Rage consumed Arthas, at the cult, at Kel'Thuzad, at Mal'Ganis, and even at himself. His hands trembled as he stepped away from the granary, his thoughts spiraling. He had failed. The leader of the cult had stood right in front of him, and he had let him escape. All he could think about was how many would die because of that, how many already had. For a moment, the weight of it threatened to crush him, but he forced it down. He still had a duty to fulfill. He knew who was responsible now, and he would do everything in his power to stop them, even if it cost him his life. North, that was where Kel'Thuzad was going, and Arthas would follow. They mounted up, and Arthas rode like a man possessed. The nightmares they had witnessed had begun to dull, replaced by a singular focus. End this. End him. A large group of undead surged forward to stop them, but Arthas didn't slow. He drove his steed onward, shouting as he swung his mace in wide, brutal arcs, each strike fueled by the anger building within him. Bodies fell beneath him, heads crushed, limbs torn away as he carved a path through them. In a brief lull, he saw him, a figure standing in the distance, watching. Kel'Thuzad. Arthas called out, and without hesitation the others followed. Jaina blasted a path forward, fireballs tearing through the undead as they advanced. Arthas saw nothing else, only his target, nothing else mattered. He finally reached his prey, and Arthas let out a raw, primal yell as he swung his hammer, striking Kel'Thuzad at the knees. His men joined him, cutting and striking in a fury of their own. When it was over, Kel'Thuzad lay broken before them, his robes torn and soaked in blood. Even then, he spoke. His death would change nothing. The scourging of the land had already begun. They did not linger. They turned toward Hearthglen. If there was still time to warn anyone, if anything could still be saved, they had to try. The sky was overcast early that morning as they neared Hearthglen, the clouds hanging low over the deceptively peaceful hills. Then, cutting through the quiet, came the sound of gunfire. Fear gripped them instantly, and without hesitation they charged forward, riding hard through the rolling terrain. The land looked calm, almost welcoming, but the sound of battle told a different story. Cresting the hill, they saw men and dwarves ahead, armed with rifles firing into the distance. For a moment, a single thought struck them all at once. Were they too late? Arthas rode forward and called for them to hold their fire, demanding to know what was happening and why they were so heavily armed. The defenders quickly explained that they had seen undead in the surrounding area and had armed themselves in preparation, but the town itself was still safe. Before relief could settle in, a scout shouted out to Arthas, warning that an undead army was heading straight for Hearthglen. Arthas turned to Jaina. She looked exhausted, far more than she had let on. The rest they had taken through the night had done little to restore her strength. Even so, she remained steady, but he could see the toll it was taking. There was no time to hesitate. He told her to leave, to find Uther and bring reinforcements. He would stay and defend the village. Jaina tried to protest, but Arthas wouldn't hear it. Every second mattered now. He ordered her to go. Reluctantly, she complied, conjuring a portal and stepping through it before vanishing from sight. Arthas watched it close, knowing full well what he had just done. The force they had might be enough to handle scattered undead, but not an army. Before he could give further orders, Falric called out to him, drawing his attention to several crates nearby. As Arthas approached, a sense of dread settled over him. He hoped he was wrong. He asked what the crates contained. A villager answered without hesitation. Just a grain shipment from Anderhall. There's no need to worry, my lord. It's already been distributed among the villagers. We've had plenty of bread. The words hit harder than any weapon. As Arthas began to piece together the full scope of Kel'Thuzad's plan, the man he had just spoken to suddenly doubled over in pain. Others followed almost immediately. A strange glow pulsed through their bodies before they collapsed, clutching their stomachs as blood poured from their mouths. One reached desperately toward Arthas for healing, but the horror of what he was witnessing left him frozen in revulsion as the man convulsed and died within moments. Arthas stood frozen, shocked, not just by what he was witnessing, but by his own reaction. For a fleeting moment, a thought crossed his mind. Could the light even heal this? He tried to call out an order, but no words came. The dead man's eyes snapped open, his body lurched upright, and in that instant, everything became clear. This was how Kel'Thuzad had built his army so quickly. The villagers began to rise. Arthas reacted immediately, shouting for his men to defend themselves as he brought his hammer down on one of the corpses before it could fully stand. Around him, more bodies began to stir, rising not just nearby, but throughout the village. The only advantage they had was that these newly risen undead were clumsy, unfamiliar with their weapons. Those who had rifles fired wildly, their shots missing more often than not. It didn't make it any easier. Arthas' men fought for their lives, faces set with grim determination as they struck down the very people they had come to protect. Skulls were crushed, bodies cut down, each blow landing heavier than the last as the reality of what they were doing set in. Then the true threat arrived. The undead army descended upon Hearthglen. Skeletons long dead marched alongside freshly turned victims, while others wore remnants of armor from lives long past. And among them were the abominations, hulking masses of stitched flesh that had taken multiple men to bring down before. But Arthas did not falter. He would not. Raising his hammer high, its light flaring brilliantly against the darkened sky, he called out to his men, "Hold your ground. We are chosen by the light. We shall not fall." Arthas had lost track of how many he had been fighting. He never stopped swinging his hammer, his arms trembling and his lungs burning with every breath. The light was the only thing keeping him and his men moving, steadying them when their bodies should have given out. It was their one true advantage. The undead were vulnerable to it, and a clean, decisive strike could stop them where they stood. But still they came. Wave after wave crashed against them, ghoul after ghoul, relentless and unending. These had once been his people, and even as he lifted his hammer again, that truth lingered in the back of his mind, until a familiar voice broke through the chaos. Uther had arrived, leading his knights into the fray, fresh and battle-hardened. With them came Jaina, despite the exhaustion weighing heavily on her. The tide shifted almost immediately. The undead began to fall faster, and with it came renewed strength for Arthas and his men. Uther's forces didn't hesitate at what they faced. Jaina had prepared them well. Each new wave was met with hammer, sword, and flame, driven back by sheer will. At last, the final of the walking dead fell to Jaina's fire, and as the flames died, so too did her strength. Her legs gave out beneath her and she quickly reached for her water skin, drinking deeply as her hands shook. She forced herself to eat as well, pulling out dried meat in a desperate attempt to restore even a fraction of her strength. Uther stood in silence, looking out over the sea of dead before them. Arthas, however, did not. His gaze had drifted elsewhere, to the bloated, fly-ridden corpse of a horse lying among the carnage. His thoughts had already moved beyond Hearthglen, Stratholme, Mal'Ganis. This was where it would end, and so he decided to start heading to Stratholme ahead of everyone, despite objections from the others. Uther tried to reason with him, to slow him down, but Arthas wouldn't listen. He even tried to draw Uther into his anger, reminding him that Stratholme was where he had become a paladin. But Uther refused to take the bait. "Easy, lad. Brave as you are, you can't hope to defeat a man who commands the dead all by yourself." Arthas said nothing. He mounted his horse and rode off without another word, needing to be alone. Behind him, Jaina and Uther watched him go. "He's feeling the weight of the crown for the first time," Uther said quietly. "He's never had to before. This is all part of it, my lady. Part of learning how to rule wisely. I watched Tyrannus struggle with the same thing when he was a young man. Both good men, both wanting to do the right things for their people, to keep them safe and happy. But sometimes the only decision is which is the lesser evil. Sometimes there's no way to fix everything. Arthas is learning that." Jaina could not let him go alone. Taking Uther's advice, she followed, keeping her distance. She cloaked herself in invisibility, watching him without interfering. Arthas rode hard, anger clouding his thoughts, at Kel'Thuzad, at the cult, at everything that had happened, even at his horse for not moving faster. So lost in it all, he nearly struck a man standing in the road. Even though Arthas nearly hit him with his horse going at a full gallop, the man didn't flinch. Medivh had come to reach the prince at last, hoping this time someone would listen. Arthas snapped at him, anger spilling over, but the man calmly replied that he would not have been harmed. He spoke of Arthas' father, of warnings that had gone unheard, and told him the truth, that this land was already lost. If Arthas truly wished to save his people, he would leave and go to Kalimdor. Arthas refused. He could not abandon his kingdom. Before leaving, the man offered one final warning. The harder you strive to slay your enemies, the faster you'll deliver your people into their hands. Then he transformed into a raven and disappeared into the sky. Arthas remained, too consumed by the weight pressing down on him to understand what had just been said. Jaina revealed herself then, explaining that this same prophet had come to Dalaran, warning Antonidas of the same fate. But there was no time to dwell on it. They continued on toward Stratholme with Uther following behind, until they were forced to stop for the night. By morning, Arthas informed Jaina of his grim realization. The plague was far worse than they had thought. It was not a matter of necromancers raising the dead later. The grain itself carried it. The bread killed them and turned them into undead. This was how Hearthglen had fallen so quickly. They reached Stratholme ahead of the others. Rain had fallen throughout the journey, turning the roads into mud. By the time Uther and his knights arrived, the cold had set in. Jaina, though cloaked and hooded, was soaked through and shivering. Arthas scanned the city and hoped that he would see no sign of the plague, but that was just wishful thinking. The wind turned and suddenly he smelt that same sickly sweet odor he smelt at Hearthglen before the townspeople had turned. It was too late. The plague had been made into the bread. He turned to everyone and told them that everyone in Stratholme had been infected. Uther refused to believe it, asking if Arthas had gone insane, but Jaina stepped forward backing him up. If they had eaten the grain, then they were infected, and if they were infected, they would turn. But even as she said it, her mind was racing, grasping for something, anything that could stop this. Antonidas once told her, if a thing is magical in origin, then magic can combat it. If they had a little time to think, if they could calm down and react from logic and not emotion, perhaps a cure could... Arthas didn't let her finish. Arthas proclaimed the city had to be purged. Uther was horrified. How can you even consider that? There's got to be some other way. This isn't a blighted apple crop. This is a city full of human beings. But Arthas didn't waver. Jaina cried out, unable to believe what she was hearing, telling him they couldn't do this. Arthas turned to her, eyes filled with anger and hurt, and in that moment she saw it clearly. He believed this was the only way. Listen to me, we don't know how many are infected. Some of them might not have even eaten any grain at all. Others might not have had a lethal dose. We don't even know what a lethal dose is. We know so little. We can't just slaughter them all like animals out of our own fear. I'm trying to protect the innocent, Jaina. That's what I swore to do. They are innocent. They are victims. They didn't ask for this, Arthas. There are children in there. We don't know if it affects them. There's too much unknown for such a drastic solution. What of those who are infected? They'll kill those children, Jaina. They'll try to kill us and spread out from here and keep killing. They are going to die regardless, and when they rise, they'll do things that in life they would never have wanted to do. What would you choose, Jaina? That would be my personal choice, yes, but we can't make that choice for them. Don't you see? No, I don't see. We need to purge this city before any of them have a chance to escape and spread the contagion. Before any of them turn, it's a kindness. And it's the only solution to stop this plague right here, right now, dead in its tracks. And that is exactly what I intend to do. Arthas, give me a little time, just a day or two. I can teleport back to Antonidas and we can call an emergency meeting. Maybe we can figure out some way to... We don't have a day or two, Jaina. This affects people within hours, maybe minutes. I saw it at Hearthglen. There is no time for deliberation or discussion. We have to act now, or it will be too late. There was nothing left to say. Arthas gave the order. Uther refused.
Damn it, Uther. As your future king, I order you to purge this city.
You are not my king yet, boy. Nor would I obey that command even if you were.
Then I must consider this an act of treason.
Treason? Have you lost your mind, Arthas?
Have I? Lord Uther, by my right of succession and the sovereignty of my crown, I hereby relieve you of your command and suspend your paladins from service.
Arthas, you can't just...
It's done. Those of you who have the will to save this land, follow me. The rest of you, get out of my sight.
You've just crossed a terrible threshold, Arthas.
Jaina?
I'm sorry, Arthas. I can't watch you do this.
She left with Uther trembling, barely able to hold herself together as she rode away. Arthas called after her, but she closed her eyes, tears falling as she whispered her apology. He was alone, but still he could not understand. How could she agree with him and still leave? Doubt crept in. Was she right? No, she couldn't be. If she was, then he was about to become a mass murderer, and he knew that wasn't who he was. He knew it. When he came back to himself, he saw how few soldiers remained and wondered if they could truly take the city. Falric spoke up, agreeing with him, and others followed. Arthas gripped his hammer. There is no pleasure in what we do here, only grim necessity. Only the need to halt the plague here and now, with the fewest casualties possible. Those within these walls are already dead. We know it, even if they do not. And we must kill them quickly and cleanly before the plague does it for us. He looked at the men before him, the men who didn't turn away from their duty. They must be slain and their homes destroyed, lest the dwelling become shelter for those whom we are to save. The men nodded and gripped their weapons. This is not a great and glorious battle. It is going to be ugly and painful, and I regret its necessity with my whole heart. But it is with my whole heart that I know we must do this. For the light! The order was given, and the culling began. The risen were easy, the living were not. The people did not even reach for their weapons at first, unable to comprehend what was happening. The first to fall to Arthas' hammer was a child, a young boy. As the boy tried to speak, Arthas cried out and struck him down, crushing his chest. His mother watched in horror, but she wasn't able to move. And then she was next. It didn't get easier. The screams, the pleading, the questions. It only became harder. His helm became his shield, hiding everything beneath it as he pressed forward. The city burned around them, homes set ablaze with people still inside, cries echoing through the streets. For a moment, when some of the townspeople fought back, he found a hollow justification. But the guilt remained. Then a voice called out behind him. I've been waiting for you, young prince. I am Mal'Ganis. Arthas turned but saw no one, but he could sense a dark presence near him and felt something like relief. At last, the one behind all this death in the kingdom was here. Voices sounded from behind every door, and villagers who had been hiding from the carnage stumbled out, but they had already turned. Their bodies silhouetted by the green, sickly glow Arthas had already seen in Hearthglen. The voice continued. As you can see, your people are now mine. I will now turn this city household by household until the flame of life has been snuffed out forever. Mal'Ganis said with a laugh. Arthas shouted back that he would not allow it. Better that these people die by my hand than serve as your slaves in death. Mal'Ganis' laugh trailed off, and Arthas wanted to try to find him, but he was busy fighting for his life as a group of undead, 3 deep, charged at him. And Arthas was forced back into battle. Time lost all meaning after that. He no longer knew how long he had been killing or how many living and dead had fallen before his hammer. At last, the culling was done. The city lay in ruins, and his people had been slaughtered by his hand and the hands of his soldiers. He stood there exhausted, shaking, nauseated by the smell of blood, smoke, and the sickly sweet scent of poisoned bread still lingering in the air, even though the bakery itself had become a burning shell. Blood and ichor covered his armor. But even after all that, one task still remained. One final enemy had to die. Mal'Ganis descended from the sky, his wings outstretched as he landed on the roof of the building near Arthas. Now Arthas had read of dreadlords in books at Dalaran, had seen pictures of them before, and knew they were enormous, with large wings and unnatural legs wrapped in armor along the thighs and lower portions of their limbs. But the thing that truly haunted him was not the size or the armor. It was the eyes, those glowing green eyes, and the sharp teeth bared in an arrogant sneer. Terror was the dominant feeling Arthas had in that moment, and he fought to break through it. He was going to end this, he had to. He thought of all the souls in the city he had torn through, of the terrified men, women, and children who had not understood that he was doing this to save their souls. Hatred overrode the terror and the guilt, and in that moment he was ready to kill this dreadlord and end it here and now. Or so he thought.
We are going to finish this right now, Mal'Ganis. Just you and me.
The dreadlord laughed.
Brave words. Unfortunately for you, it won't end here. Your journey has just begun, young prince.
Mal'Ganis told Arthas to come to the Arctic land of Northrend, and that was where he would find his true destiny. Then he disappeared, and Arthas went almost manic with rage, swinging his hammer wildly until exhaustion forced him to stop. He swore then that he would hunt Mal'Ganis to the ends of the earth, and he knew now that Northrend was where he had to go if he meant to end this threat once and for all. 3 days had passed since the slaughter at Stratholme, and Jaina could no longer stay away. She had to see the aftermath for herself. A day and a half earlier, Arthas had come to her, asking her to follow him to Northrend. She had tried to warn him, tried to convince him it was a trap, but just like before the culling, he refused to see reason. He saw only one path forward. With that, he set out on his quest to the frigid north. As she walked through the ruins of what had once been a peaceful city, she saw fires that should have long since died out still burning, and it was clear that dark magic lingered here, infecting the land itself. The smell was nearly unbearable, so she pressed a handkerchief to her nose, infused with peace bloom essence, trying to dull the stench as she moved deeper into the devastation. Everywhere she looked, there was death. The people hadn't even understood why this was happening, and they hadn't been given a chance. She had hoped that maybe they would let the children survive, but even the children had not been spared, their bodies lying among the many others who had been unarmed and defenseless. They never stood a chance once it began. Questions flooded her mind. Would they all have turned into undead? Most probably would have, but all of them? There was no way to know. They knew so little about the plague. Far too little. And then came the question that would haunt her, as it had haunted so many before her. Could she have done more to change the outcome here? Arthas had been so determined, so unwavering, that it was hard to imagine anything short of killing him would have stopped him. He hadn't been seeing reason. He hadn't been listening, and so those questions would remain unanswered, lingering in her mind long after she left this place. She stood there lost in her thoughts until a familiar voice broke through them. Uther approached, saying he had expected to find her here, and he needed to know where Arthas had gone. He told her that Arthas had taken the Lordaeron fleet with him, and while Uther couldn't understand why the men had followed him, Jaina answered simply it was because he was their prince, and they loved him. They wanted to help him. They didn't know what he had done. She finished by saying that Arthas had gone to Northrend. Before Uther returned to Capital City to inform King Tyrannus, the two spoke about everything that had happened. Jaina admitted that she was overwhelmed with doubt and regret. Before Uther returned to Capital City to inform King Tyrannus, the two spoke about everything that had happened. Jaina admitted that she was overwhelmed with doubt and regret, questioning whether she could have done more, whether she could have stopped him, whether she could have made him see reason. Uther listened intently and said,
Anyone with a heart would wonder the same. I know I do.
When she looked at him surprised, he nodded and continued,
I could not fight him. He is still my prince, but I wonder, could I have stood in his path? Said something else, done something else?
He sighed and shook his head.
Perhaps not. But that moment is in the past, and my choices cannot be undone. You and I both look to the future now.
Jaina Proudmoore, you had nothing to do with this slaughter. They spoke a while longer before Uther turned to leave, asking if she would be coming as well. But Jaina wasn't ready. Uther regarded her kindly before departing to inform the king of what had happened and where his son was heading, leaving Jaina alone in the middle of the devastation. She stood there, taking in everything around her. The smell was becoming unbearable, but she didn't move. She wanted to remember this. This would not become something forgotten, buried away in the footnotes of history. As she finally prepared to leave, a raven descended before her, transforming into the prophet she had seen before talking to Antonidas. This time he urged her to heed his warning and lead her people west to Kalimdor. A shadow had fallen over this land, and it would consume everything if they remained. With King Tyrannus, Antonidas, and Arthas brushing off his warning, this was their only chance for survival. Jaina hesitated, but she had seen enough. The death, the destruction, everything that had been lost. She could not deny it any longer. After a moment, she agreed and said she would do what she could to lead her people to Kalimdor. The prophet warned her not to delay, then departed. Leaving her alone once more, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in what felt like forever. Hope. Within the frigid land of Northrend, Arthas and his fleet arrived in an area known as Daggercap Bay. It was an ideal landing point, as the cliffs and surrounding trees provided a natural barrier, allowing them to unload their gear and establish a camp nearby. As they arrived, the soldiers shivered, rubbing their hands together in a futile attempt to stay warm, all except Arthas. Though he felt the cold, he did not shiver or react as the others did, standing still while the rest of the crew struggled against the biting cold. After the camp was set up, the soldiers turned in for the night in preparation for their hunt for Mal'Ganis the following day. But Arthas was not given rest. He had a strange dream, one he had seen before, the moment he had been forced to kill his favorite horse, Invincible, after a devastating fall. Only this time, something was different. In his hands was a different weapon, a large, two-handed blade, its surface etched with runes that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. He didn't understand what it was, but he could feel it. This weapon held the power to turn the tide for his people. The next morning, as Arthas and his soldiers began exploring the area, they came across an old friend and former mentor, Muradin Bronzebeard. The dwarf later explained that he and his expedition had come to Northrend in search of a blade known as Frostmourne, believing it could be used against the undead. But before they could make any progress in locating it, an emissary arrived from Lordaeron, bearing orders from King Tyrannus. The expedition had been cancelled. Arthas and his forces were to return home at once. Their camp lay some distance from the shore where their ships awaited. The main roads back had been blocked by the undead, forcing the troops to carve a path through the forest in an effort to reach the fleet. But Arthas could not return, not yet. Mal'Ganis was still out there. Everything he had done, everything he had sacrificed, would mean nothing if he turned back now. So while he outwardly agreed to the emissary's orders, he had no intention of following them. Arthas knew his men would obey the king without question. They would follow the chain of command to the letter. If he wanted them to stay, he would have to ensure they had no choice. And so, he devised a plan. One that would make retreat impossible. Slipping away through the woods, he sought out mercenaries and hired them to burn the ships. When Muradin learned of what Arthas intended to do, he tried to talk him out of it. But just as at Stratholme, Arthas would not be swayed. In his mind, this was the only path forward. By the time the ships were set ablaze, the soldiers had arrived, demanding to know what had happened. And it was here that Arthas took another step down his dark path. The mercenaries had served their purpose. Now, they were expendable. Declaring that they were responsible for the destruction of the fleet, Arthas drew his mace and charged, leading his men in the slaughter of the very mercenaries he had hired. Muradin didn't think Arthas would go this far, lying to his own men and then murdering the very people he had hired. He tried to confront Arthas outside, attempting to understand what had snapped in his former pupil. The undead assault had clearly taken its toll, but going to these lengths felt completely out of character for the man he once knew. Before he could press much further, cannon fire erupted as the undead launched another attack. Muradin told Arthas that he believed he knew where the sword was, though he was hesitant to seek it out. He had his doubts about how much it could truly help, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He agreed to guide Arthas using a map he had acquired. while Arthas informed Falric that he and the rest of the soldiers would need to hold off the undead for as long as possible. They would return as quickly as they could to help finish the fight. The trek was treacherous, the snowfall growing heavier with each step, but they managed to make their way to the cave. As they neared the entrance, a sense of unease settled over Muradin, but Arthas pressed forward without hesitation. A faint glow pulsed from within, and Muradin's instincts told him something was wrong, so they proceeded with caution, wary of any traps that might await those who ventured too far inside. It didn't take long for that feeling to prove true. Voices echoed through the cave, warning them to turn back, telling them that only death and darkness awaited those who continued forward, but Arthas was undeterred. He pressed on, with Muradin following close behind. Deeper they went until finally they saw it. The sword embedded within a massive shard of ice. The blade appeared to hover, suspended within it, glowing faintly. As they approached, Muradin spoke again, trying one last time to make Arthas see reason, but he refused. To Arthas, this blade was everything. It was his salvation and his kingdom's. It meant that everything he had done would not be in vain, and nothing was going to stop him now. In one final attempt, Muradin stepped closer to examine the blade, and he recognized the ancient script etched into it. Kalamag, the language of the elementals. He read aloud, "Whomsoever takes up this blade shall wield power eternal. Just as the blade rends flesh, so must power scar the spirit." The blade was cursed. Muradin made one last plea to his pupil. He had taught him to fight with many weapons, to use them when necessary, but the price this one demanded was too great. Arthas needed to walk away. But Arthas was done listening. He called out to the spirits, declaring that he would pay whatever cost was required, that he would do whatever it took. And despite every warning, every sign telling him to stop, he surrendered himself to the blade. The ice encasing the sword exploded outward, shards flying in every direction. Arthas managed to shield himself, raising his arms to block and avoid the debris, but Muradin was not so fortunate. Arthas didn't see what happened to him, but he believed he was dead. At last, Arthas took hold of the blade from his dreams, the blade that promised the power to end his enemies. He let that power flow through him, feeling it seep into every part of his body, until it finally settled within his heart. He was ready to face Mal'Ganis, ready to end the nightmare once and for all with the weapon he believed would bring salvation to his people. But in truth, it would be their undoing. Arthas arrived back at camp, Frostmourne in hand and ready to end the undead threat to his soldiers. He saw his troop numbers had shrunk, which he expected, but there were no undead in camp. That didn't surprise him honestly, as his men would know to kill those who fell to ensure they didn't rise again. Falric approached Arthas, saying they had tried to hold them off, but his next question came quickly, asking about Muradin. Arthas flatly told him that he had died and quickly moved on, throwing himself into the fray. The blade's power was incredible, far better than his hammer that now lay in the cave that once held Frostmourne. In his hands, it sliced through them with little effort, and while Arthas felt extreme joy from finally being able to take revenge on the undead who had made his homeland a living hell, he caught sight of Falric watching him. His expression caught somewhere between fear and something else. Excitement, perhaps, at having a weapon on their side capable of cutting through the threat with such ease. Whatever the reason, Arthas pushed it out of his mind. His focus was singular, carving the undead into nothing but fragments and finally ending the Dreadlord who had led him here. The bodies piled up around Arthas and the camp as he carved through the battlefield. And when it finally seemed that the undead threat was done, he called out to Mal'Ganis, telling him to stop hiding and show his face so they could finish their little dance they had been having. He heard a laugh first, then the Dreadlord appeared, wings outstretched, with that arrogant smile in those glowing green eyes. This time, the Dreadlord's appearance didn't affect Arthas, and he was ready to end this. But something he didn't expect was for Mal'Ganis to say that the Dark Lord knew this would happen, that Arthas would forsake his comrades. And then Mal'Ganis told him that the voice of Frostmourne he was following and the Dark Master that Dreadlord served were one and the same. Arthas was initially shocked, but his new master's next instruction was what he craved most of all, to kill Mal'Ganis, and so he had no problem following that order. Mal'Ganis, on the other hand, clearly wasn't aware of that part of his master's plan, and while he tried to fight off Arthas' attack, it was useless. He fell to the blade that would claim so many more in the days and years to come. The end of Mal'Ganis was only the beginning for Arthas' new journey. as he walked off into the wintry landscape, leaving his troops to fend for themselves while his new master explained the plan to his new champion. Months passed, and Arthas returned to Lordaeron a changed man. Certainly not how his father or kingdom would expect, but a very changed man indeed. He sent word to his father in a letter reading, "I would like to speak with you in private, father, and tell you of the things I have learned and seen. You have, I am certain, spoken to Jaina and Uther. I can imagine what they have said, tried to turn you against me. I assure you I have only done what I believe to be the greatest good for the citizens of Lordaeron. In the end, I have destroyed the one who began this plague upon our people, and I return home victorious, eager to begin a new era for our kingdom." Arthas' appearance would be one that brought shock to his father. His golden hair had turned stark white, and he had become far more pale. But his troops were no longer the living soldiers that had ventured out with the young prince. They were Death Knights, raised in Northrend and now serving him without question. When they arrived back home, bells rang in celebration for their returning prince and his forces who had bested the evil in Northrend. Arthas walked at the front with Falric and Marin, an old friend who had known him since they were kids, walking just behind him. They moved through the courtyard to the cheers of the kingdom, happy to have their enemies slain, as the flower petals rained down from above. As the petals rained down upon the soldiers, one landed in Arthas' hand. He admired its beauty, and it had him think back to when he believed he would marry Jaina, with petals falling all around them on their special day. But quickly, the petal began to decay and then turned to dust. Arthas cast away the dust that was the petal just like that memory, as he, Falric, and Marwyn continued forward to the throne room. As they entered, they knelt, with Arthas placing Frostmourn's blade tip against the ground in front of him. He watched as his father rose to greet him, excited to see his son after so long, though he moved slower now, aged by the events that had unfolded. Arthas thought only that soon it wouldn't matter. He stood, pushed his hood down, and revealed his face to Tyrannus, shocking the king. Then Arthas marched forward, forcing his father back into the throne as panic set in, and Tyrannus asked what he was doing. Arthas simply said, "Succeeding you." And with that, he thrust the blade into his father's chest, capturing his soul within Frostmourne. The slaughter began as the guards rushed Arthas and his 2 Death Knights, but they were no match for their power. In a short time, the throne room fell silent, and soon after, the slaughter of Capital City followed, ending faster than anyone could have imagined. Few escaped. The undead tore through innocent civilians without hesitation, sparing no one. Every soul that fell became another addition to the army of the Lich King and his goal of ending the living menace. But Arthas had one more goal, an old friend to raise into undeath, the same one who had been so good to him in life, his horse Invincible. He went to his steed's grave and raised him into undeath, ready to charge onward in the name of the Lich King as they cut down any who stood in their path. Following the assault on Capital City and the murder of his father, Arthas and his army set out to recover the remains of the wizard Kel'Thuzad. They returned to the place where the mage had fallen in Anderhall, but in death, his body had dissolved into a foul, soup-like substance, a result of his dabbling in necromantic magic. There was little that could be done, but an acolyte said they could use their siege machine to carry the remains of their former master. After grabbing his remains, Tychondrius, a dreadlord in service to the Lich King, intervened. He warned that the lingering energy within Kel'Thuzad's remains was slowly fading, though there was still a way to preserve it. If they wished to carry the power with them to quell the loss and restore the mage, they would need a special urn, one capable of containing what was left of him. Arthas and his undead forces caught up to the urn Tychondrius had spoken of. It was part of a funeral procession, being led down the road by none other than Uther, accompanied by a small group of soldiers. Arthas had burned down the kingdom he once fought so hard to protect, and yet, in this moment, he felt nothing. Whatever remained of that part of him was gone. He would do what was necessary to claim the urn for Kel'Thuzad's remains. Even with the undead backing Arthas up, and knowing the power he now wielded, Uther stood his ground. This would be his final stand. The anger he once held had changed. He had watched Arthas grow from a boy into a man, had dismissed his selfishness as nothing more than a child's failing. He had excused so much, believing the prince would one day find his way, but no longer. Now he stood against him.
Your father ruled this land for 70 years. and you've ground into dust in a matter of days.
Very dramatic, Uther. Give me the urn, and I'll make sure you die quickly.
The urn holds your father's ashes, Arthas. What, were you hoping to piss on them one last time before you left his kingdom to rot?
I didn't know what it held. Nor does it matter. I'll take what I came for one way or another.
Uther's final promise to Tyrannus, his friend and king, was to give his remains the burial they deserved after his own son had murdered him. But Uther simply answered that he would rather die honoring the promise he made than to live at Arthas' mercy. The battle between mentor and student began. Both showed their skill, Arthas wielding Frostmourne with unnatural precision, while Uther's years of experience kept him on the defensive. Still, Arthas pressed forward, relentless, until he found an opening and brought Frostmourne down in what should have been a killing strike. Uther blocked it. Their weapons locked as both men strained to end the other. Uther forced Arthas back, and for a moment, it seemed as though nothing had changed. Arthas had never been able to defeat him before, and now, Uther raised his hammer for the final blow. The light answered him, surging through his body in a radiant burst that burned Arthas as he was driven to his knees. Frostmourne slipped from his grasp as he waited to be struck down, and then he felt it. The hilt of the blade was back in his hands. He didn't know how. His body moved without his command. Then his master's voice echoed in his mind.
Every light has its shadow. Every day has its night. And even the brightest candle can be snuffed out. And so can the brightest life. Uther brought the hammer down, but Arthas moved. In an instant, he was back on his feet. Uther was powerful, but facing Arthas and Frostmourne was unlike any battle he had fought before. The blade fed him strength when he needed it most, and this was a moment of need. Arthas surged forward, striking with relentless force, blow after blow, crashing against Uther's defenses until at last, an opening revealed itself, and he took it. Frostmourne drove into Uther's shoulder, slipping through the gap in his armor. The blade bit deep, forcing the paladin to stumble, and Arthas pressed the attack in a frenzy. Though Uther fought to defend himself, it was no use. His strength failed him. His good arm gave way under the assault until he collapsed to his knees. He was defeated, but he would not surrender. His body could no longer answer his will. Blood loss stole what little strength he had left. Before Arthas struck the final blow, Uther spoke.
I dearly hope that there's a special place in hell waiting for you, Arthas.
We may never know, Uther. I intend to live forever.
And just like that, one of the brightest lights was snuffed out. But Arthas had come for the urn, and he would claim it.
He lifted it from where it lay, pouring out his father's ashes beside Uther's body before placing Kel'Thuzad's remains within. With that, Arthas and the Scourge turned toward their next destination, Quel'Thalas.
From Anderhall, their journey to the Elven lands was a long one. 6 days passed as Arthas and his army rained terror upon any village or people they came across. Along the way, they gathered more forces, including massive spider-like creatures known as Nerubians, sent by the Lich King to aid Arthas on his march. As he drew closer to Quel'Thalas, Arthas would occasionally catch movements in the trees. He was sure they were Elven scouts, slipping back through the forest to warn their people. But he knew they had seen him long before he ever noticed them. It didn't bother him. He had no doubt the elves possessed no defense he couldn't break. That confidence wavered when he interrogated 2 prisoners taken along the way. One, a priest, could offer little of use, but in his desperation, he revealed enough for Arthas to realize there was another way into the kingdom. And the second prisoner proved far more useful. Tempted by the promise of power, he turned on his own people, and just like that, Arthas was handed the keys to Quel'Thalas. Sylvanas listened as the scout reported on Arthas and his army. He warned that if their defenses were breached, Quel'Thalas would likely fall, but Sylvanas remained undeterred and turned to Kelmarin. We are Quel'Dorai. Our land is impregnable. He will not enter. Do not fear. He must first know how to break the enchantments that protect Quel'Thalas. Then he must be able to do so. Better and wiser foes than he have tried to take our realm before now. Have faith, my friend, in the Sunwell's strength and in the strength and will of our people." Sylvanas and her Farstriders waited at the outer gate as the fallen prince approached. When she first laid eyes on his army, even she was taken back. Abominations stitched together from multiple corpses, bodies barely held intact by strands of flesh, and siege machines unlike anything she had seen before. Empty, yet somehow more threatening for it. She was grateful when the wind shifted, carrying the stench away from her. She could have given the order then, could have caught Arthas unaware, but it would have been a cheap strike and her honor forbade it. They exchanged words. She urged him to turn back, to spare his forces and her people the death that would follow. She spoke of the enchantments that protected Quoth-Las, believing that even the outer gate, though weaker than the inner defenses, would be enough to hold him. Arthas was unfazed. Sylvanas decided there had been enough talk. She gave the order, and a volley of arrows surged forward, loosed from behind her and from the archers along the wall. The aim was clear: cut down the living, then finish the rest with fire. The first volley struck true, but the charge didn't stop. The undead hurled themselves against the walls, limbs were torn away, bodies fell, but still they came. Others climbed over the broken remains, scaling the walls and cutting down the defenders where they stood. The elves fought valiantly, but their cries of pain, of fury, of desperation echoed across the battlefield. Sylvanas caught sight of one of her own, Sheldaris, standing her ground. Too far away to hear her words, Sylvanas could still see her lips moving, fighting, clinging to life for even a moment longer. Then she was overwhelmed. Sylvanas watched as she fell beneath the tide. There would be time to grieve later. Arrow after arrow flew from Sylvanas' bow, each loosed faster than the last. Even she was surprised by the speed. But then her focus shifted. A creature. It missed her by only a few feet, but seized another of her fighters instead, its talons digging deep into Vorithil's shoulder. He struggled desperately to break free as Sylvanas loosed an arrow at the creature's neck, but it struck and glanced off, as if the thing's hide were stone. As though it had grown tired of the struggle, the creature tightened its grip and climbed higher into the air, only to release him moments later. Vorithil's body struck the ground near a pile of fallen elves. Sylvanas could scarcely believe what she had seen, but the shock only deepened as the cultists she had thought dead began to stir. She did not yet understand how the dead were being raised, but she was about to witness it firsthand. First it was the cultists, rising once more, then her own elves. Among the fallen, Sylvanas saw a familiar body begin to move. Vorithil. Now he staggered forward, shambling towards the very allies he had once fought beside. Sylvanas looked toward Arthas. He had a grin on his face as he raised his sword into the air and the dead began to rise. Rage built within her. With every passing moment as she fought back the scourge, it only grew stronger, but then something else caught her attention. Something that pulled her focus away from the fight entirely. A shot from one of the siege engines rang out, but the impact was wrong. It wasn't the heavy crash she expected, it was softer, wetter. In a brief lull she saw it. The engines were loaded with the dead, her dead. Elven bodies, along with the fallen of Arthas' own forces, were being hurled back at her lines. The horror of it struck her all at once. After witnessing the dead rise and seeing her numbers dwindle, she made the call. Grabbing who she could, she ordered a retreat. They ran, fast as they could, pulling the wounded with them, falling back toward the inner gate in the hope it might slow him down. Reaching the far side of the bridge, Sylvanas turned to Telcor and ordered him to ride for the Sunwell Plateau, to warn them, to prepare for what was coming. She could see the hesitation in him, the desire to stay and fight, and she knew he was capable, but one bow would not turn the tide of this battle. He obeyed, begrudgingly. With that, Sylvanas put one final desperate plan into motion. She ordered her soldiers to hold their ground, to buy just enough time to destroy the bridge. She had seen destruction before, when the orcs burned the forest. It had been tragic, but the land had healed in time. This was different. This was magic, and once this kind of death took hold, it would not be undone so easily. It could scar the land for years to come. As Arthas approached, she called out to him, taunting that even if he broke through the outer gate, the inner defenses would stop him, that it required a key he would never possess. He didn't react. Sylvanas withdrew from the bridge, Moments later, it collapsed behind her in a thunderous crash. She and her remaining forces continued their retreat, hoping, if only for a moment, that it would slow him down. But doubt had begun to take hold. What if he already knew? The barrier protecting Quel'Thalas was known as Bandonoriel, the gatekeeper in the common tongue. Arthas learned of it from an elf named Darkon Drathir, who, in exchange for the promise of power, gave him everything he needed to know. The key to breaking the barrier was the Key of the Three Moons, but it had been shattered into 3 pieces and hidden within separate temples, places few even knew existed. Each temple had been built atop an intersection of ley lines, feeding the magic that sustained the barrier. Arthas moved through them methodically, tearing each one down in turn. Though his forces succeeded, he found himself surprised by the resistance the elves were able to muster. But in the end, it wasn't enough. With the pieces reclaimed and the barrier broken, Arthas and his army advanced on Silvermoon. Sylvanas and what remained of her forces stood before the city, near the East Sanctum, watching as the wave of death drew ever closer. No words needed to be spoken. They all knew they would not survive this. But if they could stall the assault, even for a short time, perhaps those at the Sunwell might be able to prepare. The battle began as siege engines hurled their payloads, bladed constructs spinning through the air like 3 massive knives fused together, carving through anything in their path. The elves fought with everything they had. Their arms grew heavy, their bodies bled from countless wounds, but still they did not stop, not until their hearts gave out. Sylvanas found herself surrounded, locked in the center of a swarm of ghouls and other undead. Her blades moved faster than she thought possible, cutting down anything that came near. She could feel the tide closing in, certain that at any moment it would overwhelm her. And then it stopped. The undead pulled back. And as Sylvanas caught her breath, she glanced around in confusion, trying to understand what had changed. That was until she saw him. Arthas stood before her. He saluted her bravery, telling her that it ended here, and Sylvanas answered without hesitation. "Then I'll make my stand here, butcher. Anar Allah Balor." The battle between them was brief. They charged one another. Arthas remained atop his mount, while Sylvanas met him head-on, driven by anger, regret, and the weight of what she had failed to protect. Frostmourne rested in his right hand, the reins steady in his left. Sylvanas tried to block the strike, but it was no use. Her weapon shattered, and Frostmourne drove into her abdomen. A cold, piercing numbness spread through her as she felt the life draining away, along with the crushing realization that she had failed her people. Arthas pulled the blade free, and Sylvanas collapsed to the ground. With what strength she had left, she told him to finish it, to grant her a clean death. Arthas was not going to grant her that mercy. The woman who had vexed him so would suffer far more than a clean death. He had another purpose for her, one that would ensure her pain never truly ended. With Frostmourne, he tore her soul from her body and shattered it, twisting it with the blade's dark power. The agony that followed was beyond anything she had known in life. When it was over, she had become a banshee, whose very scream would bring pain to all who heard it. With Sylvanas and her fallen people now bound to his will, Arthas continued his march toward the Sunwell. The remaining citizens of Silvermoon stood no chance. The city was all but eradicated, and with little left to oppose him, he turned his attention to Quel'Thalas. Raising Frostmourne, a rune along the blade flared to life, and at his command, the waters before him froze solid. An icy bridge stretching outward to carry the scourge toward the Sunwell. But one final obstacle remained. King Anasterian's Sunstrider stood ready, wielding Felamalorn, determined to defend what remained of his kingdom. He fought valiantly, as so many had before him, but, like Sylvanas, like the countless others who had stood against Arthas, it wasn't enough. He fell to the rune blade, his soul consumed as Frostmourne claimed yet another victim. With the king dead, Arthas approached the Sunwell and, without hesitation, cast Kel'Thuzad's remains into its sacred waters. The radiant light of the well dimmed, its brilliance twisting into something darker, something corrupted. From its depths, something rose. A towering skeletal figure, wrapped in dark vestments, its empty eye sockets burning with unnatural fire. Kel'Thuzad had been reborn into a lich. With his task complete, Arthas turned away from the ruined Sunwell. Before leaving, the scourge ensured that any elves who still lingered were put to the sword. Their work in Quel'Thalas was finished, and the march would continue. The next leg of Arthas and Kel'Thuzad's journey led them into the snowy mountains of Alterac, where the Blackrock clan still maintained a functional demon gate. Kel'Thuzad needed to commune with the demon lord Archimonde. The surrounding region was filled with orc encampments, and to ensure nothing would interfere, the Scourge moved through them methodically, wiping each one out before finally striking the main stronghold guarding the portal. After a hard-fought battle, the Blackrock forces were broken, and the gate was theirs. Kel'Thuzad began the ritual. Within the frame of the portal, a swirling mass of green, black, and violet energy churned violently until a figure finally emerged. Towering blue skin and imposing beyond measure, the creature stood upon cloven hooves, his very presence radiating power, even in just this state. He told Kel'Thuzad that to fully cross into Azeroth, he would require the Book of Medivh, which is held within Dalaran. The summoning ritual would begin in 3 days' time, at twilight. Once complete, the Legion would once again unleash its full might upon the world. With their objective clear, Arthas and his forces marched on Dalaran. As they approached, Arthas called out to those within, demanding their surrender, warning that if they did not open the gates, all would fall. Instead, a familiar figure appeared before him. Archmage Antonidas declared that Dalaran would not fall so easily, and that the barriers surrounding the city would destroy any undead who attempted to breach it. With that, he vanished back within to prepare for the attack. He didn't have long. Kel'Thuzad quickly uncovered how the barrier functioned. It was sustained by 3 mages channeling its power, and if they fell, the barrier would collapse with them. The Scourge moved swiftly, hunting them down one by one death bringing the defenses closer to failure until, at last, the barrier fell. With the city exposed, Arthas advanced and soon came face to face with Antonidas. The Archmage summoned a water elemental and unleashed powerful magic, arcane, frost, and fire. But it wasn't enough. Frost had little effect on Arthas, and while the other spells struck true, they did little to stop him. Frostmourne hungered. With each swing, Arthas pressed forward, breaking through the Archmage's defenses. Antonidas' strength began to fade, his magic faltering as the Scourge closed in around him until at last, the rune blade found its mark. Another soul was claimed. With Antonidas fallen, Arthas and Kel'Thuzad secured the Book of Medivh and began preparations for the ritual. It would take time, 30 minutes in which Kel'Thuzad could not be interrupted. The forces of Lordaeron threw everything they had at the Scourge, charging again and again in a desperate attempt to stop what was coming, but they could not break through. And when the ritual was complete, Archimonde stepped into Azeroth. His arrival was immediate and devastating. The great city of Dalaran fell within moments, its towering violet spires torn apart and reduced to rubble beneath the Demon Lord's power, as the Legion's destruction began anew. While the fall of Dalaran was a devastating blow to the Alliance, many refugees were able to escape before the attack. Led by Jaina and following Medivh's warning to take her people and leave, they set sail for Kalimdor just before the city was destroyed. While Jaina and her forces made the journey safely, the Horde faced far greater trouble. As they sailed past the Maelstrom, their fleet was scattered by a violent storm. Thrall and some other orcs were driven into a chain of islands, where they encountered the Darkspear trolls, who also had been caught in their own chaos. With the trolls' help, they were able to regroup and continue toward Kalimdor, now joined by new allies. Back in Kalimdor, Grommash Hellscream had already landed with his clan. He soon crossed paths with Jaina and her soldiers, sparking a clash between the two forces. When the rest of the Horde finally arrived, led by Thrall, he ordered Grom to stand down and leave Jaina's encampment alone. But Grom could not hold to that command. His bloodlust took over, and he continued his assault on her forces. Thrall was eventually able to rein him in, but as punishment for defying his orders, he sent Grom into Ashenvale Forest to gather lumber for their base. While Grom departed into the woods, Thrall set out to search for the rest of the scattered horde. In his search, Thrall encountered creatures he had never seen before, beings who would soon be known to him as the Tauren. There, he met their leader, Cairn Bloodhoof. Cairn informed Thrall that his people were under attack by invading Centaur and asked for his aid. Thrall agreed, and with his help, they were able to drive back the invaders. In gratitude, Cairn told him of an oracle he believed could offer guidance, located within the Stone Talon Mountains. As Thrall made his way to Stone Talon with some Taurens who joined him, he saw that Jaina was traveling there as well. They finally arrived at where the oracle was said to be, and there Jaina and Thrall encountered each other. Before the situation could escalate, a familiar voice called out, the Prophet, the one who had warned them and urged them to leave. And now the Horde and Alliance would have to set aside their old hatreds and stand together against a powerful enemy already making its way to Azeroth, one that threatened to bring an end to all life. Back in Ashenvale, Grom and his clan were gathering lumber, unaware that the Night Elf Sentinels had already reported their actions to Tyrande. Though she was angered by what she heard, there was also a sense of relief. At least it was not demons invading her forest this time. For the time being, she ordered her sentinels to watch from a distance, hoping the orcs were simply passing through and would soon be gone. But it quickly became clear they were not merely passing through. They took what they needed from the forest without hesitation, cutting down its trees with little regard for what they destroyed. To Tyrande, these newcomers were barbaric and violent, and she would not allow them to remain any longer. On Tyrande's orders, the sentinels struck at the orcs. They were skilled fighters, but the orcs were not so easily brought down. Their strength and ferocity made every clash costly, and rather than being driven back, Grom seemed to thrive in the chaos. The battle only fueled him. As the fighting dragged on, the elves called upon their demigod Cenarius. He entered the fray himself, and the tide shifted almost immediately. The orcs fought with everything they had, but it quickly became clear they could not bring him down by conventional means. To Cenarius, they were no mere invaders. He could sense the taint within them, the lingering trace of demon blood running through their veins. He also believed their skin marked them as agents of the Legion. To him, those marked them as enemies of the wilds. He would not be satisfied with driving them from the forest. Nothing short of complete eradication would suffice. Against the combined strength of the elves and their demigod, the orcs began to falter. Retreat or death, those were the only paths left for them. And then, Grom felt it. Something deeper in the forest, something calling to him. Drawn by it, he led his warriors into the woods, searching until they found its source hidden within a dense corner of Ashenvale. A pool of thick green liquid lay before them. This was the blood of Manaroth, the pit lord that gave his blood for the orcs to drink all those years ago, causing the blood curse. Earlier, Tychondrius and the pit lord Manaroth had come to Ashenvale, and the mere presence of Manaroth had already begun stirring something within the Warsong clan. Their tempers sharpened, their instincts growing more violent by the hour, and Tychondrius and Manaroth had known this would happen. They had left the blood here intentionally, knowing it would draw the orcs in. Though years had passed since they last drank the demon blood, the curse had never truly left them. It lingered in their veins, waiting. The Legion saw the wild gods as a threat, especially Cenarius, and their plan had been to poison Ashenvale and weaken him, even bringing the Skull of Gul'dan to spread the corruption. But now, something far more direct presented itself. The orcs had a choice, though to Grom, it didn't feel like one. He stepped forward first and drank. The others followed soon after, and just like that, the chains were reforged. The orcs bound once more to the Legion, and to Manaroth. What followed was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Empowered by the demon blood, the orcs tore through the forest, cutting down anything that stood in their path, night elves and creatures of the wild alike. Cenarius fought with everything he had, calling upon the strength of the forest itself, but against the fury of the blood-cursed orcs, even that was not enough. Grom struck, his axe driving deep into the demigod's back, and with that, Cenarius fell. And with his fall, the forest itself seemed to recoil. The wilds around Hyjal trembled, as though they could feel what had been lost, and many fled in terror. Some would return to fight, but most remained hidden as the war pressed on. Following Cenarius' fall, Grom would come to realize that he and the Warsongs were bound to the Legion once more. Back in the Stone Talon Mountains, Thrall and Jaina were informed by Medivh of Grom's turn and his return to the Legion's control. Jaina had heard of the Legion before. She had studied them in Dalaran, and she understood what that meant. If the Alliance and Horde did not stand together against them, neither would survive what was coming. Thrall agreed. He had seen the vision Medivh had shown him, and he knew what had to be done. Grom had to be saved, and the Alliance and Horde had to work together. Though neither side truly trusted the other, they formed a tentative pact and set out to free him, seeking to purge the bloodlust from his soul through the combined efforts of Alliance priests and Horde shamans. But first, they would have to capture him, and Grom and the Warsong clan would not make that easy. They struck at anything in their path, friend or foe, and while Thrall and Jaina tried to limit the damage, the fighting was relentless. After a grueling battle, they were finally able to subdue Grom and bring him to a place where the priests and shamans could begin the ritual. And there they purged the bloodlust from him. Now free from the bloodlust and clear-headed once more, Grom was overcome with shame for what he had become. But he did not linger in it. He promised to make things right. He knew who was responsible: Manaroth. While the priests and shamans worked to free the rest of the Warsong clan, Thrall and Grom set out to find the Pit Lord. They tracked him to a fell-corrupted canyon deep in southeastern Ashenvale, knowing that unless he was destroyed, the orcs would never truly be free. Manaroth didn't see them as a threat. Thrall struck first, infusing his mace with the power of the earth until it glowed a brilliant white. With that energy coursing through it, he hurled the weapon at the Pit Lord. Manaroth blocked it with ease, then surged forward, driving his massive axe into the earth. The impact sent Thrall crashing into the cliffside, leaving him unable to move temporarily. He then turned his attention to Grom. There was no concern in his eyes, only expectation. He believed Grom still belonged to him, that he always would. But whatever remained of the curse in Grom's veins was nothing compared to the will burning within him to save his people. Grom charged. He leapt forward and drove his axe deep into Manaroth's chest. The blow struck true, and in the next instant, the Pit Lord's body began to rupture, fell energy bursting outward in a blinding explosion that consumed the canyon. When the light faded, Manaroth was gone, but the victory came at a cost. Gromosh had been mortally wounded in the blast, and there was nothing Thrall could do but remain at his side as his friend drew his final breaths.
The demon's fire has burnt out in my veins. I have freed myself.
No, old friend. You've freed us all.
With Cenarius dead, the Legion's plans could finally move forward. While Manaroth's death had not been part of their design, it did nothing to slow the invasion. Archimonde began his full assault on Kalimdor, leaving forces behind in the eastern kingdoms to maintain control and ensure no aid could follow. The bulk of his army then moved west. The invasion unfolded just as Thrall had seen in his vision. Infernals rained from the sky, thousands of undead and demons poured into Ajara, pushing toward Ashenvale with a single goal: the second will of eternity atop Mount Hyjal. The Night Elves' forest spirits and the combined Horde and Alliance forces fought back as best they could, but they were scattered, divided across the region. Each battle was fought alone, and alone they could not hold. The Legion overwhelmed them. Archimonde's army advanced steadily toward Hyjal, destroying everything in its path: the forest, the settlements, and any who stood against them. Nothing held. What had once been resistance became retreat. The Skull of Gul'dan had originally been meant for Cenarius, but with his death, its purpose changed. Now it would serve the invasion itself. Tichondrius, still in possession of the artifact, moved ahead of the main army and found a remote stretch of land near Hyjal. There, he began to channel its power into the earth, and the land began to rot. Corruption spread through the forest, twisting trees and warping wildlife into hostile creatures. Rivers turned a sickly green. The once pristine woods became what we know today as Fellwood. The corruption didn't stop there. It crept steadily toward Hyjal, threatening to reach the very heart of what the Legion sought. And with Fellwood behind them, the Legion carved out a path forward, one with little left to stand in their way. Tyrande and her sentinels finally caught sight of the Legion and of Archimonde. In that moment, she understood this was only the beginning. The Legion did not come to conquer Azeroth. They had come to destroy it. The second well of eternity atop Mount Hyjal would give them the power to summon even more demons, perhaps even Sargeras himself, the leader of the Legion and one of the original members of the Pantheon, the beings who had shaped and ordered worlds. Tyrande knew what had to be done. Hyjal had to be defended, and for that she would need the Druids. But they weren't waking. Normally, disturbances of this scale would reach them within the Emerald Dream. They would sense it and they would rise. Yet even as corruption spread and the threat to the world grew more immediate, they remained dormant. Cenarius' death had sent a shockwave through the dream, leaving the Druids weakened, disoriented, and effectively trapped. Still, Tyrande managed to wake one, her husband, Malfurion Stormrage. Once awakened, Malfurion immediately saw the severity of what was unfolding. He set to work organizing a resistance. Using the Horn of Cenarius, he woke the remaining druids who could not be awakened by normal means. With them freed, he sent them to join the Sentinels, while others were tasked with rallying the forest creatures and the remaining wild gods. Some answered the call. Many did not. With Cenarius gone, the wild gods were scattered, difficult to find, and unwilling to risk facing the Legion. Some chose to remain hidden, unwilling to emerge against such overwhelming power. Together, Tyrande and Malfurion traveled across Hyjal and into Winterspring, awakening druids and gathering what strength they could. Along the way, they found time to reconnect after centuries apart. But Malfurion quickly saw how much Tyrande had changed. She was harder now, more resolute, willing to sacrifice far more to protect her people. The truth became undeniable when they came upon the prison of Illidan Stormrage, Malfurion's brother. To Tyrande, Illidan was not just a prisoner, he was a weapon. She believed his knowledge of demons could be invaluable in the fight ahead, but Malfurion opposed the idea, seeing his brother as far too dangerous to release. Tyrande, however, had already made her decision. She was going to free him, no matter the cost. The Watchers stood in her way, the wardens who had guarded Illidan for millennia. She commanded them to release him, but they refused, and Tyrande would not be denied. She struck them down where they stood, clearing the path to his prison. And from the darkness within, Illidan Stormrage emerged once more. Illidan had been in prison for 10,000 years, isolated in darkness. There were times when it threatened his sanity, but he endured, focusing his mind on a single purpose, finding a way to defeat the Legion. And in that time, he came to a realization. Azeroth could not defeat the Legion through defense alone. They would have to take the fight to them. But the Legion was not an army that stayed dead. Even past victories like the War of the Ancients had only been temporary. And now they had returned, just as powerful, just as relentless. Demons were not like mortal enemies. When they died, they reformed within the twisting nether, giving the Legion what was effectively an endless supply of soldiers to throw at Azeroth until the war was won through sheer attrition. Illidan understood what that meant. The only way to defeat them was to kill them within the twisting nether, or in places saturated with its energy. Though he was free at last, Illidan had no intention of returning to the Night Elves. After 10,000 years of imprisonment, he believed they would never trust him, and he resented them for imprisoning him in the first place. Also, if he tried to explain what he had learned, they would either doubt him or dismiss him as mad. So he chose another path. He would find the power needed to strike back. Illidan moved into Hyjal's war-torn forest with no clear destination at first, driven only by purpose, until he felt it. Something in the distance pulling at him, drawing him forward. In northern Ashenvale, he sensed a strong presence, and as he followed it, the trail led him deeper into corruption, into Felwood, where he encountered not a demon, but a human twisted by death. Arthas wasn't sitting on the sidelines during the invasion of Kalimdor, not by a long shot. Under the Lich King's orders, his role was to operate in the shadows, subtly manipulating the Scourge while avoiding drawing any attention from the Legion itself. Through his influence, the undead would occasionally disobey their demonic masters, and that defiance began to ripple through the ranks, creating chaos within the Legion-controlled forces. It slowed their advance toward Hyjal, and at times even allowed their enemies to escape. It wasn't enough to truly cripple the Legion, but it was enough to disrupt them. But Arthas knew he needed something more decisive. His attention turned to Tychondrius, the Dreadlord who held the Skull of Gul'dan. If Tychondrius were killed and the skull dealt with, the spread of corruption could be halted, dealing a significant blow to the Legion's efforts. The problem was that Arthas couldn't strike the killing blow himself. Doing so would reveal the Lich King's betrayal to Archimonde, and the time for that had not yet come. So instead, he looked for someone who could. Arthas sensed Illidan carving a destructive path through Ashenvale, and in him, he saw opportunity. Illidan was not loyal to the Legion, nor was he aligned with the Night Elves. He was driven by something else entirely: power, purpose, and a willingness to act. Arthas sought him out and put his plan into motion, revealing the existence of the Skull of Gul'dan and the power it held, while warning him that Tychondrius guarded it. Illidan didn't trust him, but the promise of power was enough to draw him in, and he set out in search of the skull, leaving Arthas behind, though this would not be their last encounter. Illidan carved his way through Felwood, leaving a trail of fallen demons behind him as he searched for the artifact and its guardian. He did not find Tichondrius right away, but he did find the skull. When he finally took it into his hands, he realized it held more than raw power. It carried the memories and knowledge of Gul'dan himself. The safer path would have been to draw from it slowly and cautiously, but given the urgency of the war, Illidan made his choice and consumed its power entirely. Fel energy surged through his body as the transformation began, horns pushing from his skull and wings unfurling from his back as his form changed into something no longer purely Night Elf, but something far more dangerous. He became part demon. With the power came knowledge, visions of Draenor, of the tomb of Sargeras, and of the secrets hidden within it flooded his mind. Now armed with power and understanding, Illidan turned his attention to Tichondrius. He hunted him down and killed him, dealing a significant blow to the Legion's campaign. Though Felwood remained corrupted, the spread of that corruption was halted, and it wouldn't reach Ashenvale or Hyjal. Despite what he had done, Illidan did not return as a savior. Malfurion and Tyrande saw only what he had become. By consuming the skull, he crossed a line, transforming into one of the very creatures they were fighting. Malfurion banished his brother from Night Elf lands, and this time Illidan did not resist. He accepted the exile, not out of regret, but because he believed staying at Hyjal was meaningless. One victory would not end the war, and he knew the Legion would return, so he left to fight his own war, the only war that truly mattered to him. Archimonde begins his advance on the summit of Hyjal, and with the Legion forces pushing steadily forward, it won't be long until they reach the top and claim their prize. All the allied forces, the Night Elves, the Alliance and Horde, the Forest Spirits, and the Druids gather at Mount Hyjal for the final defense. Though they face many limitations, they believe they can win, but not while divided. The Alliance and Horde still don't trust one another, and working together proves difficult. Medivh brings the leaders, Jaina, Tyrande, Thrall, and Malfurion together and makes them understand they must stand united or all will be lost. At last, they agree to fight as one, and with that unity, Malfurion reveals his plan. Archimonde cannot be defeated through brute force, so another path is needed. It is a dangerous one, and it comes at a cost. Long ago, the World Tree Nordrassil was blessed by the dragon aspects, granting the Night Elves immortality and immunity to disease and illness. If those enchantments were ignited, Malfurion believes they could unleash an explosion powerful enough to destroy Archimonde. But doing so would strip the Night Elves of those gifts, leaving them vulnerable to illness and aging for the first time in 10,000 years. It is not a choice made lightly. The cost would reshape Night Elf society, but it is the only path forward. Malfurion and the Druids begin preparing the ritual, while the defenders hold the line, buying as much time as they can. Archimonde, confident in his victory, believes the defenders will remain disorganized and easily broken. But this time, they stand together. Humans make the first stand, holding as long as they can before falling back. Then the orcs take their turn, meeting the Legion with everything they have, and finally, the Night Elves step forward to face the Demon Lord. Thousands fall, but their sacrifice is not in vain. As Archimonde approaches Nordrassil, he believes victory is already his, that the world is about to fall. But the plan takes effect. Wisps emerge from the forest, gathering around him. At Malfurion's command, they don't attack. Instead, they channel their energy into Nordrassil, igniting the ancient enchantments within. The explosion is immense. In an instant, Archimonde is destroyed, along with a vast portion of the Legion's forces. The invasion is broken, but victory comes at a cost. In the aftermath, the remaining defenders drive back what is left of the Legion. Arthas escapes to the Eastern Kingdoms to continue his master's plan. The Horde and Alliance go their separate ways, their alliance fragile at best. The Night Elves remain in Hyjal, beginning the long process of rebuilding and healing the land. Nordrassil is left severely damaged, and as was known from the beginning, the Night Elves become mortal. The damage to the World Tree also makes it more difficult for Druids to reach the Emerald Dream, weakening their connection to it. Medivh, however, has done what he set out to do. His time on Azeroth is coming to an end, his power fading as he watches the result of his efforts. Though the Legion has been defeated for now, he knows other threats remain. Still, Azeroth now stands in the hands of its people, just as he intended, and with that, Medivh vanishes into the wind.
The roots will heal in time, as will the entire world. The sacrifices have been made. Just as the orcs, humans, and night elves discarded their old hatreds and stood united against a common foe, so did nature herself rise up to banish the shadow forever. As for me, I came back to ensure that there would be a future, to teach the world that it no longer needed guardians. The hope for future generations has always resided in mortal hands. And now that my task is done, I will take my place amongst the legends of the past.
That's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed. And I figured I would leave you with some fun little things of me messing up the recording and me trying a different Lich King voice. Because, well, I tried a mod and just didn't sound right. Just sounded too much. And the voice that I went with, I do like. However, the voice I really wanted to do, I couldn't do consistently with how much the Lich King was talking. If I trained, I could probably do it. But that was not the case this time. So, yeah.
Let this be your first lesson.
Well, preferably I'd do like,
Let this be your first lesson. I have no love for you or your people.
oh my god, that is hard to keep.
Let this be your first lesson. I have no love for you or your people.
Can't keep. We need to make shorter sentences now. Listen to me. We don't know how. Damn it. Arthas gave the Orther. The Orther. Those within the walls. Those within these. Damn it. Questioning whether she. Jaina admitted that she had been. Yeah. An emissary arrived from. I was about to say arrived from Northrend. And Muradin's instincts. Muradin stepped closer to examine the blade and recognized the ancient script etching in a beam. Arthas managed to shield himself, raising an arm. Yeah, crap. Feeling it seep into every part of his body until finally settling with. Yeah. But something he didn't expect. Was for Fucking A. But Frostmourne's next instructions was. Oh my god, why can't I talk? It's the final thing, come on, man. But Frostmourne's why does that sound so weird? But Frostmourne's next instruction was what? Calamag, oh my god. Words. I don't know what my just tongue went here. But Frostmourne answered, and with the urn is in his clutches. As he drew closer to quell the loss, Arthas would occasionally catch movements. He struggled desperately to break free as Sylvanas loosed an arrow of the. Damn it, so close. So close. There was no time to question it. Sylvanas. Pawn Clove. The Archmage summoned a water elemental and though there was still a way. It's not even a hard sentence. Though there's still. Bloody hell. That he would rather die honoring the promise he made than live to Arthas at mercy. Oh my god. Still, Arthas pressed forward, relentless, until he found an opening and brought Frostmourne. Gromosh had been mortally wounded by. Leaving forces behind.